Under the blistering light of Helios's twin suns, Laika trudged through the crimson streets of Port Helios, her hand tightly clutching the small, fragile hand of her daughter, Alice. The scorching sand, hot as embers, clung to her tattered boots, each step like walking on a bed of fire. Her worn cloak, once a proud symbol when she left the astral dominion, was now ragged and filthy, offering little protection from the searing heat or the scornful glares of the crowd. Laika hadn't eaten in 4 days, and Alice, her 3-year-old daughter with pale pink skin and wide, round eyes, trembled with thirst. The little girl's cracked lips bled, their last water pouch having drawn dry 2 days ago. The few coins in Laika's pocket weren't enough to buy even a murky cup of water in the grimy market. "Mommy, I'm thirsty," Alice whispered, her voice frail, like a breath stifled by the oppressive heat. Laika knelt down, pulling her daughter into her arms, shielding her from the stinging, sand-laden wind that whipped their faces like fiery blades. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," she said, but her voice wavered, choked by despair. It was a lie, a desperate attempt to comfort both Alice and herself. They had no food, no water, no shelter, and the hope of finding work was fading like water evaporating under the relentless suns. For the past 3 months, Laika had knocked on every door in Port Helios, shipyards, market stalls, even the shadiest corners of the town. But everywhere she met only cruel contempt. "Half-breeds like you don't belong here," a Sethlon shipyard owner snarled, his 6 eyes glaring at her with disgust that burned hotter than the sun's. "Take that mongrel child and get out. Don't taint my place." He spat into the hot sand, and the workers around him erupted in laughter, pointing at Laika and Alice as if they were cheap entertainment. Laika bowed her head, pulling Alice close, trying to shield her from the vicious insults, but Alice, though young, heard them, her eyes clouded with fear she was too small to understand. The scorn didn't end there. At the market, an old woman with glittering crystalline skin snatched a tray of bread away as Laika approached, shouting, "Don't touch it! Filth like you will ruin my goods!" The crowd murmured, their words venomous as vipers. "Look at that half-breed freak! They should have died of thirst in the desert, not come here to bother us." Laika gripped Alice's hand, fighting back tears, her heart constricting. Alice didn't deserve this. She was only 3, innocent, with soft curly hair and bright eyes, now dulled by thirst. But here she was called a mongrel, an outcast no one wanted near. Laika stumbled on, her legs weak and her stomach twisting with hunger. Each breath felt like inhaling air from a furnace, and Alice began to sob softly, the tiny sound cutting into Laika's heart like a knife. She knelt in the dusty street, pulling Alice into her arms, shielding her from the prying eyes and mocking laughter of the crowd. "Don't cry, sweetheart," she whispered, but her voice broke, tears streaming down her sunburned face, mingling with the filthy sand. "Mommy will find a way." But she knew it was a lie. No one in Port Helios would help a half-breed single mother, a being deemed inferior, unworthy of existence. Helios's heat was an invisible monster crushing all life. By day, the twin suns scorched everything, making the air so hot it burned the lungs. Laika had begged for the lowliest jobs, cleaning ship floors, hauling scrap, or washing dishes in dingy taverns, but even those were denied her. One tavern owner, his skin gleaming and his voice dripping with malice, threw a bucket of dirty water at her when she pleaded for work. "Get out, you trash, before I call the guards," he shouted, and the patrons roared with laughter, as if her suffering was their amusement. The dirty water soaked her cloak, dripping down her trembling legs, but Laika didn't fight back. She just hugged Alice and fled, tears streaming down her face. Alice, exhausted from hunger and thirst, no longer had the strength to cry, only nestling deeper into her mother's arms, her eyes hazy. Laika found a crumbling wall at the edge of town, the only shelter they could claim as a sandstorm approached. The hot, biting wind, laden with sharp debris, lashed at them mercilessly. Laika held Alice tightly, using her body to shield her from the sand, but the suffocating heat made them feel like they were being burned alive. "I'm sorry, Alice," she choked out, her tears dried on her cracked face. "Mommy's so useless. I can't protect you." Alice looked up, her big eyes brimming with tears, and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." That tiny voice cut deeper than the hunger and thirst gnawing at Laika's body. Local children ran by, throwing stones and sand at them, shouting, "Dirty outsiders! Go die in the desert!" A rock hit Laika's shoulder, sending a sharp pain through her, but she didn't fight back, only held Alice closer, shielding her from the world's cruelty. She had once been a princess of the astral dominion, but now she was a forgotten shadow, unwanted and unloved. Alice trembled in her arms, her breaths weak, like a flame about to flicker out. Laika sang a lullaby from her homeland, her voice breaking against the howling sandstorm, but she knew if she didn't find work, the hunger and thirst of Helios would devour them, leaving mother and daughter as mere grains of sand swept away by the wind. Laika clutched Alice tighter, her daughter's frail body trembling against her chest. The little girl's whimpers had faded into shallow, uneven breaths, her tiny hand limp in Laika's grasp. The weight of their hunger and thirst pressed down harder than the twin suns above, and Laika's vision blurred, not just from the sand, but from the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She had nothing left to give, not even tears. As the storm's howl grew louder, a shadow loomed through the swirling red haze. Laika tensed, instinctively shielding Alice, fearing another cruel taunt, or worse, a scavenger looking to prey on the vulnerable. But the figure moved with purpose, not menace, his silhouette cutting through the storm like a blade. He wore a worn leather jacket, patched but clean, and his sun-bleached hair was tied back against the wind. His green eyes, sharp yet kind, locked onto hers as he crouched down, unbothered by the stinging sand. "You all right?" His voice was steady, warm, cutting through the storm's fury like a lifeline. Laika blinked, caught off guard by the lack of scorn in his tone. She tightened her grip on Alice, wary of strangers after months of rejection. "We're fine," she lied, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the wind. The man tilted his head, studying her with a quiet intensity that made her heart stutter. "You don't look fine," he said, not unkindly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small canteen, offering it to her. "Name's Gerald Fraser. I run a shipyard on Docking Row. You and the little one need water." Laika hesitated, her instincts screaming caution. Kindness in Port Helios always came with a price, strings attached, or worse, traps. But Alice stirred, her cracked lips parting as she whispered, "Mommy, water." The desperation in her daughter's voice shattered her defenses. She took the canteen, her hands trembling, and carefully tilted it to Alice's mouth. The girl drank greedily, small gulps turning into a soft sigh of relief. Laika allowed herself a sip, the cool liquid a fleeting mercy against her parched throat. "Why are you helping us?" Laika asked, her voice low, guarded. She adjusted her tattered cloak, hiding Alice's face from the stranger's gaze. Gerald's expression softened, not with pity, but with something deeper, empathy perhaps, or recognition. "Saw you in the market earlier," he said, brushing sand from his knees as he stood. "You've been making rounds, haven't you? No one's giving you a chance." Her chest tightened. She'd been careful, or so she thought, but this man had noticed her desperate circuit through the town. "We're just looking for work," she said softly, bracing for the inevitable rejection. But Gerald didn't turn away. Instead, he gestured toward a side street, barely visible through the storm. "My shop's not far. I could use an extra hand. Maintenance, Cleaning, maybe inventory, if you're up for it. Got a spare room, too, if you need a place to crash." Her heart leapt, but suspicion held her back. "Why us?" she pressed, her gray-blue eyes searching his for any hint of deceit. Gerald's expression softened, not with pity, but with something deeper. Empathy, perhaps, or recognition. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be on the outside looking in," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "No one should have to face this place alone." Alice peeked out from Laika's cloak, her small face smudged with dust but curious. "You have kind eyes," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Gerald crouched again, his smile warm and genuine. "Thanks, little lady," he said, offering her a playful wink. "You've got pretty sharp eyes yourself." Laika's throat tightened, a mix of gratitude and fear swirling within her. This man, this human, was offering her something no one else in Port Helios had, a chance. But hope was dangerous, and she'd learned to distrust it. Still, Alice's trembling hand in hers made the decision for her. They couldn't survive another night in the storm, not with the heat and thirst threatening to claim them. "All right," she said finally, her voice barely steady. "Lead the way." Gerald nodded, standing and offering a hand to help her up. His grip was strong, steady, and for the first time in months, Laika felt a flicker of something she'd almost forgotten: safety. As they followed him through the storm, the wind howling around them, she dared to hope that this stranger might be the miracle she'd stopped believing in. Under the dim glow of the shipyard and docking row, Laika began her first day of work with a heart heavy with doubt, but flickering with fragile hope. The sandstorm outside had subsided, but Helios's relentless heat seeped through the metal walls, making the air inside the workshop as stifling as a forge. Gerald Fraser, rugged with sharp green eyes, led her through rows of ancient machinery, the clanging of metal echoing like the heartbeat of a massive beast. Alice, clutching her mother's hand, walked timidly, her wide eyes taking in the surroundings with a mix of curiosity and fear. Laika held her daughter close, still wary, though Gerald's warm voice from the night before lingered in her mind. No one deserves to face Helios alone. Gerald assigned Laika simple tasks: sweeping the workshop floor, cleaning tools, and sorting rusty scrap. "Take it slow, get used to the place," he said, offering a slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Laika nodded, silent, but inside, a storm of emotions churned. After 3 months of scorn, of being treated like garbage, Gerald's kindness made her both grateful and uneasy. She feared it was temporary, that he, too, would eventually turn his back like everyone else in Port Helios. For the first few days, Laika worked in silence, keeping her head down, avoiding the gazes of Gerald and Polin, a gruff Cephalon mechanic with 4 arms and a surly demeanor. Polin often glared at her, his 4 eyes narrowing whenever she accidentally dropped a wrench or was slow to hand him a tool. "Hurry up, don't dawdle," he snapped, his voice like metal scraping together. Laika bit her lip, swallowing her humiliation, and worked harder. She didn't want Gerald to regret giving her this chance. Each night, when she returned to the small room behind the workshop, a simple but clean space with a bed and a wooden table, she held Alice close, whispering, "Mommy will do well, sweetheart. I won't let them send us away." Alice, though frail from their days of hunger and thirst, began to show rare smiles. She loved trailing Gerald whenever he had a free moment. With surprising patience, Gerald would sit with her, crafting tiny toy ships from scraps of metal. "Look at this, little one. It's a comet cruiser," he said, handing Alice a shimmering model. She giggled, her eyes lighting up, and in a moment of innocence called him Papa. Laika, nearby, felt her heart clench. She wanted to correct her daughter, but seeing Alice lean into Gerald, finding joy in his simple gestures, she couldn't bring herself to. "She just misses home," Laika murmured, avoiding Gerald's gaze. He only nodded, not pressing further, but his gentle smile seemed to say he understood. Over the following weeks, Laika settled into the rhythm of the shipyard. She worked tirelessly, her hands growing calloused from cleaning and hauling. But she didn't stop at simple tasks. One afternoon, as Poland struggled with a jammed ship engine, Laika watched quietly. She recognized the issue wasn't the hardware, but a misaligned energy conduit, a skill from her past life she kept hidden. Unable to hold back, she stepped forward, hesitating. "Can I try?" she asked. Poland shot her a glare, but Geralt, standing nearby, nodded. "Go for it," he said, his tone calm but his eyes curious. Laika took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she dismantled the engine's casing. She adjusted the conduits with startling precision, her fingers moving over the connections like an artist at a piano. Within 10 minutes, the engine roared to life, running smoother than ever. Poland stood stunned, his forearms crossed, mouth agape. "How'd you do that?" he demanded, his voice a mix of suspicion and awe. Laika lowered her head, mumbling, I saw something like it before." Geralt, standing behind, gave a subtle smile. "Nice work." And in his voice was a recognition Laika had never received on Helios. From then on, Geralt gave Laika more complex tasks, repairing circuit boards, checking energy systems, even assisting with ship component designs. She worked with fierce focus, as if every bolt and circuit was a chance to prove she wasn't the mongrel others called her. Poland, though still brusque, began to soften. Once when Laika fixed a transmission he'd given up on, he muttered, "Not bad for a half-breed." It was a rare compliment, and though Laika said nothing, a spark of pride flickered within her. Through their shared work, Laika began to feel warmth from Geralt. He never judged her, never looked at her with the contempt others did in Port Helios. When she made mistakes, he corrected her gently, without a hint of blame. When she succeeded, he offered brief but sincere praise. "Good job, Laika." Those moments, small as they were like cool water in the parched desert, soothing the scars in her heart. Geralt also spent time with Alice, which moved and confused Laika. He'd bring small bits of food, a dry loaf of bread, a rare piece of fruit, and share them with the girl. One evening, as Laika finished late work, she saw Geralt sitting with Alice on metal crate, pointing at the stars through the workshop's window. "That's the Wanderer's constellation. They say it guides the lost." Alice, nestled against his shoulder, whispered, "Papa knows so much." Geralt chuckled, not correcting her, but his eyes met Laika's as she stood quietly in the shadows. In that moment, she felt an unspoken connection, as if he understood her pain and hopes without her needing to say a word. A bond grew between Laika and Geralt through simple things. Shared nods after a long day's work, smiles exchanged when Alice laughed, quiet moments fixing machinery under dim lights. Laika realized Geralt wasn't just her savior from the sandstorm, but someone who helped her rediscover her worth. He respected her, not as an outcast, but as a colleague, a friend, and perhaps something deeper. One evening, with Alice asleep in their small room, Laika sat with Geralt outside the workshop under Helios's starry sky. "Thank you," she said softly, daring to meet his eyes for the first time, "for everything." Geralt shrugged, his smile a touch shy. "Just doing what's right," he said. But his gaze held a sincerity and care that made Laika's heart race. She didn't dare name the feeling, but when he placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle yet firm, she knew a bond was forming, one she'd never dared to dream of. In Gerald's shipyard at Docking Row, the clanging of hammers and the hum of machinery blended into a familiar rhythm. But today, the air in the workshop felt heavier than usual. Laika hunched over a circuit board, her skilled hands deftly adjusting energy conduits, her focus razor-sharp. Beside her, Alice sat on a wooden crate, her small legs swinging, clutching the toy ship Gerald had made for her. Gerald stood nearby, inspecting a ship engine, but his green eyes occasionally flicked toward Laika and Alice, as if ensuring they were safe. 3 weeks had passed since Laika and Alice arrived at the shipyard, and their lives had begun to stabilize. Laika no longer flinched when Poland growled at her, and Alice had started calling Gerald Papa naturally, warming Laika's heart while also piercing it with a pang of guilt. But deep down, Laika remained uneasy. Port Helios was not a place that forgave people like her, a half-breed single mother with a different child. She knew this peace was temporary, and today that fear became reality. The workshop door slammed open with a jarring clang of metal. A gust of hot, sandy wind swept in, carrying 3 towering figures. Laika startled, pulling Alice close, her hand trembling as it rested on the small knife hidden in her cloak. Gerald immediately stepped in front of them, his green eyes narrowing, gripping a wrench like a weapon. Poland, working in a corner, stopped, his 4 arms crossing, his wary gaze scanning the newcomers. The leader, an alien man with shimmering silver skin and long glossy black hair, strode in with an air of authority. His golden eyes were icy, but when they landed on Laika, a flicker of complex emotion, part kinship, part disappointment, crossed his face. Beside him stood Slither, a massive Cephalon bodyguard, his 6 gem-like eyes glinting, his body clad in gleaming armor. The third figure, a petite female advisor with green skin, held a glowing device, her cold gaze sweeping the workshop like a battlefield assessment. "Laika," the leader said, his deep voice resonating like a temple bell. "It's been a long time, sister." Laika felt her blood turn to ice. Alice burrowed deeper into her arms, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Normad," Laika whispered, her voice trembling but striving for strength. She didn't want Alice to see her mother weak, not in front of the brother she'd left behind. Normad, prince of the Varathis Concord, an alien empire obsessed with genetic purity, where individuals were shaped by rigid genetic rituals, stood before her like a specter from her past. Gerald stood forward, still clutching the wrench, his voice low but sharp. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, locking eyes with Normad. "This is her and Alice's home. Who are you, and what do you want?" Normad smiled, but it was a cold, humorless expression. "I am Normad, prince of the Varathis Concord, and Laika is my sister, Princess Lysara, who fled her responsibilities." He glanced at Laika, his gaze a mix of reproach and pain. "And this child," he pointed at Alice, "is a threat to the Genetic Council's order. Her ability, controlling technology with her mind, cannot be allowed to exist unchecked." Laika clutched Alice tightly, her heart pounding. She knew Alice was special, but she'd never fully grasped the significance of her daughter's gift. "Alice is not a threat," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "She's just a child. You will not touch my daughter." Slither, the Cephalon bodyguard, stepped forward, his 6 eyes glinting with menace. "Princess Lysara, you have no choice," he growled, his voice like metal scraping stone. "The Genetic Council has ordered it. You and the child must return to Varathis, or we will use force." Gerald didn't back down. He stood protectively in front of Laika and Alice, the wrench now looking like a sword in his hand. "Try touching them," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "They're my family. No one's taking them from here." Gerald's declaration hit like a stone dropped into a still lake, stunning both Normad and Slither. Laika looked at him, her heart momentarily stopping. Family. The word echoed in her mind, awakening a feeling she hadn't dared to dream of. Alice, nestled in her mother's arms, whispered, "Papa." Her small voice was full of trust, as if she'd found the safest place in the universe. Normad studied Gerald, his golden eyes narrowing, sizing up an opponent. "A human," he said, his tone tinged with disdain but also curiosity. "You dare call them family?" Do you know who you're defying? The Virathus Concord does not forgive those who stand in its way." Gerald shrugged, his smile both defiant and calm. "I don't care if you're a prince or a god. Laika and Alice stay here, with me. If you want a war, start it." The tension in the workshop reached a breaking point. Poland, in the far corner, quietly picked up a metal rod, ready to step in if needed. Normod's advisor, with her glowing device, whispered something in the prince's ear, her eyes scanning Alice like she was a specimen. Laika felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood tall, holding Alice tightly, determined not to let them see her fear. Normod raised a hand, signaling Slither to stand down. He stepped closer to Laika, his voice softening but still carrying the weight of command. "Laika, you don't understand what's at stake. The Genetic Council sees Alice's ability as a weapon. If you don't return, they'll hunt you both, and no corner of this galaxy will be safe. But if you come back to Virathus, you could change things. We could overthrow the Council, build a future where purity isn't a blade at our people's throats." Laika shook her head, tears glinting in her silver-gray eyes. "You don't get it, Normand. I don't want to fight for Virathus. I just want Alice to live, to be free. You promised to protect me once, but you chose the Empire over your sister." Her words cut like a knife, making Normod falter. Pain flickered in his eyes, but he quickly regained his regal composure. "I'm not here to argue, Laika. I'm here to save you and the child. But if you stay, I have one condition." He turned his sharp gaze to Gerald. "This human, Gerald, must come with us. Harmony between species is the only thing that might convince the Council that Alice isn't a threat. He'd be living proof of our ideals." Gerald scoffed, his eyes never leaving Normod. "You think I'd let Laika and Alice walk into your trap? I don't buy your talk of harmony. But if Laika wants to go, I'll go with her, not for you, but for them." Laika looked at Gerald, her heart constricting. He was ready to face a prince, an empire, just to protect her and Alice. She felt the weight of his words. Family wasn't just a word, it was action, sacrifice. Alice, sensing the tension, hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "Mommy, don't go. Papa will be sad." Normod watched them, his expression more complex than ever. "You have 1 week to decide, Laika," he said, his voice low but heavy with authority. "After that, the Council will act, and I won't be able to protect you." He turned, Slither and the advisor following, leaving the workshop in a heavy silence. As the door slammed shut, Laika collapsed, clutching Alice, her tears finally spilling over. Gerald knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder, saying nothing, but his presence was enough to make her feel she wasn't alone. In that moment, amid the hum of machinery and Helios's oppressive heat, Laika knew that whatever dangers lay ahead, she'd found a family, one she'd fight to keep. After Normand and his entourage left, the air in the workshop hung heavy, as if choked by the desert heat. Laika sat on a wooden crate, clutching Alice tightly. The little girl trembled, her pale pink eyes brimming with tears, her small hands gripping her mother's cloak. Gerald leaned against a workbench, his knuckles white around a wrench, his green eyes burning with anger, tinged with helplessness. The hum of machinery now sounded like the roar of fear in Laika's heart. "They'll come back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They'll take Alice." Gerald stepped forward, kneeling before her and taking her hand, but even his warmth couldn't dispel her despair. "I won't let that happen," he said, though his voice wavered, betraying a rare hint of unease. Alice burrowed deeper into her mother's arms, whispering, "I don't want to go." Her words cut into Laika's heart like a knife, stealing her breath. Poland, the Cephalon mechanic, stood in the corner, his forearms crossed, his 6 glittering eyes watching them. Usually gruff, he broke the silence, his voice low like the rustle of desert sand. The Genetic Council doesn't play games. They'll raise Helios to get the girl. Laika stiffened, but Poland raised one hand, signaling calm. But Helios has its ways. The trial of the sands, an ancient ritual our people honor. In the western desert, beneath the dunes, lies an old temple. Survive the sandstorms, illusions, beasts, and riddles, and you'll claim an artifact, a symbol of family. The Helios community will recognize you, and even the Virathis Concord will have to think twice. Poland's words were like a cool breeze in a furnace, easing the suffocating tension. Laika looked up, a spark of hope flashing in her silver-gray eyes. Gerald squeezed her hand, the first smile breaking across his face. "We'll do it," he said, his voice firm. Alice lifted her head, whispering, "We'll go together, right?" Laika nodded, holding her daughter tighter. At the edge of Port Helios, Laika stood with Alice's hand in hers, her silver-gray eyes scanning the vast dunes. Gerald stood beside her, a backpack slung over his shoulder, packed with water and survival gear, his rugged face set with determination. They had decided to face the trial of the sands, an ancient Helios ritual, to prove their bond and secure legal protection for Alice. If they succeeded, they'd claim a sacred artifact from the ancient temple, recognized by the Helios community as a family, strong enough to challenge the Genetic Council's demands. But failure meant death beneath the burning sands. Laika looked at Alice, her 3-year-old daughter with soft, curly hair and pale pink eyes, clutching the toy ship Gerald had made. "Are you ready, my love?" Laika asked, her voice gentle but laced with worry. Alice nodded, her tiny hand squeezing her mother's. "I'll help Mommy and Papa," she said, her clear voice steady with resolve. Gerald knelt, ruffling Alice's hair, his smile warm and reassuring. "We've got this, little one," he said, then met Laika's gaze, his green eyes a silent vow. Laika took a deep breath, her heart racing, not just for the trial ahead, but for the bond between them, a family she'd never dared to dream of. They stepped into the desert, the scorching sand threatening to swallow Laika's tattered boots. The trial consisted of 4 stages, each a brutal test of coordination, trust, and love. Failure at any stage would mean the desert claiming them. Just hours after leaving Port Helios, a sandstorm roared in, howling like a feral beast. The scorching wind whipped red sand into swirling columns, lashing at them like fiery whips. Laika clutched Alice to her chest, shielding her with her cloak, but the sand slipped through every crevice, stinging her eyes. Gerald led the way, one hand raised to protect his face, the other gripping a rope tying the 3 together to keep them from getting lost. "Find cover," he shouted, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. Despair crept into Laika's heart, but then Alice's small, clear voice cut through. "Mommy, there's light over there." Laika followed her daughter's pointing finger, but saw only a blinding haze of red sand. Yet she trusted Alice's unique ability to sense energy flows. It had never failed. "Gerald, follow Alice," she called, tightening her grip on her daughter's hand. Gerald nodded, guiding them through the storm, each step heavy as if wading through a river of sand. After tense minutes, they stumbled upon a small cave hidden behind a massive boulder. Inside, the air was cooler, though still stifling. Laika cradled Alice, checking her for scratches, her heart aching at the sight of her daughter's cracked lips. "You did so well," she whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Gerald sat beside them, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Our little guide," he said, and Alice gave a weak smile, nestling into her mother's arms. In that moment, in the dimness of the cave, Laika felt the strength of their family, a bond strong enough to face the desert itself. Leaving the cave, they entered a strange stretch of desert where the air shimmered like rippling water. Illusions materialized so vivid they sent chills down Laika's spine. She saw Gerald standing far off, his back turned, his voice cold. "I don't need you, Laika. You're just a burden." The words sliced into her heart, but then she heard Alice's sobs. Turning, she saw her daughter standing alone, crying, "Mommy, don't leave me!" Laika ran toward her, but each step only pushed Alice farther away, as if the desert were swallowing her. "It's not real!" Gerald's voice snapped her back to reality. He grabbed her hand, his gaze steady. "We stay together." Laika took a deep breath, gripping his hand tightly, and called out to Alice. The girl, using her ability, sensed distortions in the illusion's energy. "Mommy, Papa, go right," she said, pointing to what looked like a solid rock wall. Laika hesitated, but trusted her daughter. They stepped through, and the illusion dissolved, revealing a narrow path of sand. Emerging from the maze, Laika hugged Alice tightly, tears streaming down her sunburned face. "I'm sorry, my love," she choked, haunted by the fear of losing her. Gerald rested a hand on her shoulder, his voice warm. "We made it because we trusted each other." Laika met his eyes, her heart racing, not just from survival, but from the deepening bond between them. As they pressed on, they reached a stretch of desert where the sand shifted unnaturally, as if something lurked beneath. Suddenly, a massive creature, a sandworm with razor-sharp jaws, erupted from the ground, sand exploding around it. Laika shoved Alice behind her, drawing her small knife, though she knew it was useless against the beast. Gerald grabbed a metal rod from his pack, standing protectively in front of them, his eyes fearless. "Laika, get Alice out of here," he shouted. But Laika refused to run. She held Alice's hand, yelling, "Do what Mommy taught you!" Despite her fear, Alice focused, her pale pink eyes glowing. She reached out, using her telekinetic ability to lift sharp rocks from the ground and hurl them at the sandworm. The creature hissed, recoiling, but remained aggressive. Gerald seized the moment, charging forward and driving the metal rod into a weak spot on its body. Laika rushed to help, using her knife to cut a rope and lasso it around the beast's jaws, pulling it from the sand. They worked in perfect sync, like a well-oiled machine. Finally, the sandworm let out a final roar and retreated beneath the sand, leaving a heavy silence. Laika collapsed, gasping, and pulled Alice into her arms. Gerald knelt beside them, checking a cut on Laika's hand, his eyes filled with concern. "We're a team," he said, and Laika nodded, feeling their bond stronger than ever. After 3 grueling days, they reached the ancient temple hidden beneath a massive dune. Its stone door, etched with ancient Helios symbols, glowed faintly. Inside, a stone altar stood in the center, holding a shimmering metal ring, the artifact of the Trial of the Sands. To claim it, they had to solve a puzzle, arranging energy nodes on the wall in a sequence based on Helios's history. Laika and Gerald studied the symbols, but the puzzle was dauntingly complex. Alice, perched on Gerald's shoulders, pointed at a glowing node. "It looks like Papa's ship," she said, referring to the toy model he'd made. Laika realized the symbols represented stages of Helios's technological evolution. Guided by Alice, they arranged the nodes in order, from the first sand machines to modern starships. When the final node clicked into place, the altar glowed, and the ring floated up, landing in Laika's hand. She gripped it tightly, feeling the weight of their victory. Gerald pulled her and Alice into an embrace, his smile brighter than Helios's twin suns. "We did it," he said, and Laika nodded, tears streaming down her face. The ring wasn't just an artifact, it was proof of their family, a declaration that they belonged together no matter the odds. As they left the temple and returned to Port Helios, Laika wore the ring, a newfound confidence steadying her hand. The Helios community would recognize them, and with this artifact, they could face Normad and the Genetic Council. But above all, Laika knew that whatever the future held, she, Gerald, and Alice had conquered the desert not just to survive, but to become a true family. Back in Port Helios, Laika walked through the crowd of locals, holding Alice's hand tightly, the ancient ring from the Trial of the Sands gleaming on her finger. Jural walked beside her, his pack lighter now, his green eyes scanning the curious faces. They had returned from the temple not only with the artifact, but with a bond deeper than ever. The Helios community, once cold to outsiders, now regarded them with a mix of respect and astonishment. The ring, a symbol of a family that had overcome sandstorms, illusions, beasts, and riddles, was proof that Laika, Jural, and Alice belonged here. Laika felt the weight of the crowd's gazes, but this time it wasn't scorn, it was recognition. She pulled Alice closer, her 3-year-old daughter with soft curly hair and pale pink eyes, now smiling, still clutching the toy ship Jural had made. "Mommy, they're not mad at us anymore, are they?" Alice asked, her voice clear and bright. Laika kissed her forehead, whispering, "No, my love, we've shown them we're strong." Jural placed a hand on her shoulder, his smile as warm as a rare desert breeze. "We're a family," he said, and the word family rang like a vow, binding them through the trials they'd overcome. The journey through the Trial of the Sands was etched deep in Laika's mind. She remembered the howling sandstorm when Alice's telekinetic gift led them to a saving cave. She recalled the maze of illusions, where her fear of losing Jural and Alice nearly consumed her, but their mutual trust guided them out. She saw the giant sandworm, when Jural stood as their shield. Laika fought beside him, and Alice bravely used her powers to help. And she remembered the ancient temple, where, with Alice's guidance, they solved the puzzle to claim the ring, not just an artifact, but a symbol of their love and sacrifice. Each stage left a scar on her soul, but also wove a stronger thread binding them together. They returned to the docking row workshop, where Poland awaited, his forearms busy repairing a ship's engine. Seeing them, he paused, his 6 eyes glinting with surprise. "So, you pulled it off," he growled, but a rare smirk tugged at his lips. "Not bad for a bunch of half-breeds and a human." Laika smiled, for the first time unbothered by Poland's gruff words. She raised her hand, letting the ring catch the light. "Thanks for telling us about the trial," she said sincerely. Poland grunted, returning to his work, but his slight nod told Laika he was proud. That evening, in the small room behind the workshop, Laika sat on the bed, Alice sleeping soundly in her lap, her steady breaths like a soothing melody. Jural sat across from her, cleaning the wrench that had accompanied them through the desert, his expression pensive. "We did it, Laika," he said, his voice warm. "But Normad and the Genetic Council won't stop." Laika nodded, feeling the weight of the future. The ring protected them on Helios, but the Varathi Concord, obsessed with genetic purity, still saw Alice's ability to control technology with her mind as a threat. "What are you thinking?" Laika asked, her silver-gray eyes seeking comfort in Jural's gaze. He set the wrench down, moved closer, and took her hand. "I think we crossed a desert, so we can face anything as long as we're together." His words were a flame, warming Laika's heart, easing her fears. She looked at Alice, remembering their days of hunger, nights trembling in sandstorms, and how Jural had given them a home. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for giving us a chance." Jural smiled, pulling her into a gentle embrace, careful not to wake Alice. "You and Alice are my chance," he said. And in that moment, in the simple room under Helios's heat, Laika felt a rare peace. They weren't just survivors, they were a family, forged through trials, stronger than any artifact. The next day, Laika and Jural stood before Port Helios's civil council, presenting the ancient ring. The elders, with sunburned skin and sharp eyes, nodded in approval. "You are a family in the eyes of Helios," one elder declared, his voice echoing in the stone hall. The decision not only shielded Alice from being taken, but granted them citizenship, a legal bulwark against the Genetic Council. The crowd applauded, and Alice, standing between Laika and Jaral, beamed, no longer hiding behind her mother's cloak. But Laika knew the fight wasn't over. Normid, as a prince of the Virathis Concord, would return, backed by an empire's might. The Genetic Council, fixated on controlling Alice's powers, wouldn't relent easily. Yet Laika was no longer the desperate single mother who wandered Port Helios. She had Jaral, ready to defy a galaxy to protect them. She had Alice, small but mighty, with a gift that could shape the future. And she had herself, having learned her own worth through days working alongside Jaral and surviving the desert's brutal trials. They began preparing for what lay ahead. Jaral expanded the workshop, hiring more mechanics, turning it into a hub for starship repairs, with Laika as lead engineer. Her technical skills, once hidden, now shone, drawing clients from neighboring planets. Alice, under Laika's guidance, learned to control her telekinetic powers, using them to assist in the workshop, from moving tools to fixing circuits. Polan, still gruff, became a reluctant mentor, teaching Alice small tricks about machinery, making her giggle when he pretended to growl. Laika and Jaral also built a network of allies. They connected with other outcast groups on Helios, those shunned like Laika once was. Together, they formed a small alliance, ready to defend the rights of those oppressed by the Virathis Concord and similar powers. Jaral, with his sincerity and resolve, became an unofficial leader, while Laika used her technical knowledge to contribute, crafting communication devices and defense systems. One evening, as Helios's twin suns set, Laika, Jaral, and Alice stood on a dune near the workshop, gazing at the starry sky. Alice pointed at a constellation, her voice bright. "Papa, that's the Wanderer's constellation, right?" Jaral nodded, hoisting her onto his shoulders. "That's right, kiddo. It guides those who never give up." Laika smiled, leaning into Jaral, feeling his warmth. She thought of Normid, his offer to return to Virathis and change its ways. Perhaps one day she'd face her brother, not as a fugitive, but as a mother, an engineer, a warrior. Their future was uncertain. The Genetic Council might send ships. Normid might return with promises or threats. But Laika no longer feared as she once did. She had a family, a community, a purpose. They had conquered Helios's desert, and they would face any storm ahead. As the stars illuminated the ring on her finger, Laika knew that no matter how perilous the path, they would walk it together, like wanderers who never lose their way.